All right, coin traders, what is going on? Thanks for joining me for another show looking at Chainlink, LINK on that ticker. Big pullback like we've seen out of a lot of the rest of the crypto space, especially after finding this nice rally. But we did have a little bit of a top here, a little bit of rejection. That's okay, though. And we're going to be talking about that why in the show today. But overall, on this daily chart, things are still looking pretty good. Longer term, still found a very nice consolidation point on the bounce and actually had a nice bullish break from that. Now, typically when we do find a little bit more of that retracement to the downside, some of these consolidation patterns do ultimately end up favoring another downside direction, since that was the path of the travel heading into this consolidation. But one of the things that we actually do want to look at is that we had such big, long, choppy action over here at the end and start of the year that ultimately, kind of like we talked about a lot of times on the channel, that when we do actually retrace, we see, and this is kind of proof that why we actually see prices actually stabilizing and kind of getting held up in this overall zone, because like we have big, long stabilization of price does mean that big, long stabilization of price for a support level, and very nice to see a longer term support, nice bullish break. But if we do look at where we actually got stuck up for Chainlink here, we're getting stuck up right about the $19 level. And if we actually go ahead and look to the left a little bit, this big pattern where we're looking at getting stuck up at the top, where we were from the start of February back to about the middle of April, kind of the heart line for this is about where we actually did get rejection. So if we want to look at this overall pattern and talk about how a volume plays out into these price levels, going to turn on the VPVR, volume profile visible range. So up overhead, you can see big point of mass here, right about the 850 mark. So that's just shy of what we're talking about, the 19. But as you can see, if we do look left, that's going to be a very big point of price level trading on this big move. But so the good news about all of that is that despite getting rejected from this little bit of mass here, is that when prices do end up retracing, they actually fall into this big category where we look for prices to slip. And it's kind of like plowing through a big forest, for example, that the farther you go, the more tired you're going to be, and then the less farther you're actually going to be able to go. So at some point you will end up stopping, for example. So that's kind of the same way this works with the price, especially when we look down here on volume. Now, unless we actually saw increasing volume, we would think that the price in that instance probably would be able to actually blow through all of this big support point, since it was a big support and resistance point this whole time before we actually set our current trend high. So now to have this bounce pulling back, very realistic to think that once again, we're going to be able to find a nice support point and hopefully, ideally, not actually consolidate and see prices go back below. Obviously a possible scenario, since anything is possible in this crypto space, but especially after finding a nice bullish break on top, and especially a level for price highs that are actually topping out some of these previous technical price level supports and resistances. We know that right now, falling short of the $20 mark, but also running right up to that $19 level is a pretty big move off of the bottom here. So even finding our support pretty much just under the $13 mark, looking about almost a 50% upside move. So from current prices down, or excuse me, the current most recent trend high down to current prices, about a 23% pullback at that. So really mostly needing to take an eye on this big volume as well as volume at the bottom. If we do start to see it tapering off, then pretty much we're going to expect prices to ultimately consolidate and then continue back on north once volume does return. But if we actually do start to see a little bit more increase in volume, not going to be that likely that supports are going to hold, especially since they have been tested, and especially since on this move on a longer trend, we are forming a lower high. So with that, I actually do want to flip over into the weekly chart here and talk about this current setup. Now, overall, the setup's not necessarily that bad. And one of the things that we have to actually look at here is the 50-period EMA did barely break it, and then obviously barely broke it as resistance, but ultimately did retrace. So we're still going to call that a pretty big support and resistance line, and we probably could change it to about the 55 period or anything like that. But just for the sake of this, we're going to go ahead and still call this a very relevant level, especially month over month, or excuse me, week over week. Did find a lot of support on top of this 50-period EMA, just like we found resistance points on this chart here before ultimately finding support on the EMAs. So still in the path of least resistance, but very critical that we do actually maintain this as a big support point. So very possible coming off the trend high, find support, lower high, and then now being able to find support ideally would be putting in higher lows as well. So it does look like Chainlink has been finding higher lows. And especially if we zoom in on the most recent pattern, we're looking at a low of 11.969, a low of 12.4, and then the next low of 12.83. So higher lows on all of these weekly candles. Very good sign. And obviously now on this big move, seeing this pullback, do need to find that. Now, if we actually go ahead and look at volume down below, decreasing bullish volume on this move. So realistic to think that we do get stuck up, and then obviously now second week over week of increasing a bullish volume. So that's why it is so critical that these lower supports do hold. And then if we go ahead and look at the price levels here, we can see that we were looking at a very big level for the price resistance here on this weekly. So got stuck up multiple tests of multiple weeks at 18.317. Looking all the way left, rejection point after breaking it on bearish, and then multiple attempts of support and then also resistance. So an extremely relevant level as well. And then now we're actually looking to the downside for price level supports for this weekly close, specifically going to be coming in multiple levels. First one's going to be at 13,538. Second one below that's going to be at 13,131. So big points on this big retracement aligning with the 50-period EMA on this weekly. And then also looking left, big period of closing weekly support as well. And then on this attempt, found this level as very nice support as well. So big point of support that we actually need to see close. So even if we do see increasing week over week volume, like we said, to blow through that VPVR support as well as these levels, that's going to be a bad sign if we actually see increasing volume and actually losing weekly closing support on top of this 1313 level. So big level to be looking out for as we do go ahead, especially after putting in a weekly lower high here. Would not necessarily be out of the structure position to actually be setting that up. But that is one of the reasons why we actually do need to look at maintaining not only 50-period EMA, but also maintaining this big support zone as well. So 50-period EMA right now in the current week is coming in at 1412. So from 1412 down to about the $13 level is going to be a huge point that the bulls actually need to be defending. Otherwise, we will still be looking at a little bit more of that bearish setup in formation, especially like we said, after putting in a lower high and then looking after that, if we do break the support zone, looking at putting in the next lower low after that. Now, pulling up some technicals for the weekly here, and one thing to note specifically about this RSI on this weekly is that we actually have a big shaping up bearish divergence here. So lower highs, and then one of the things about that too is that we're actually now breaking and sitting pretty much below this moving average for this RSI. So despite a couple of times where we actually found a rally on top of it, the fact that we have lost it as a big support point does mean that now still finding it as resistance. So the trend is still shaping up below the EMA for this RSI. Now, additionally, looking at stochastic RSI here, still trending in the downside direction as well. So as we can see, putting a very nice level on top of this 80 line, crossing, not breaking the 20 line yet, and then finally breaking, and then also now putting in a lower high. So would actually need to see a reversal and another bullish cross after defense of the supports. Otherwise, we will be in jeopardy and risk of breaking below this 20 line again and actually seeing this stochastic RSI be back below the 20 line and kind of a little bit more on that opportunity to then need to see a cross and actually trend back to the upside. But right now, in this instance, still looking like a downside trend for stochastic RSI as well as the RSI as well. So that's not necessarily in favor for the bulls, especially if we do get decreasing a bullish volume, kind of like what we have seen ever since the initial move of the trend back in November. Still been putting in little lower lows for volume here, starting to taper off, and then obviously the big spike on that move, but lost big increasing volume, continuous follow through as well there. Now, going to flip over into the monthly. Don't talk about monthly charts all too often, but in this case, do want to point out several key things. Specifically, first, do want to look at the moving averages here. And on this chart specifically, we are looking at the 26 and 50 being the most relevant. So going to go ahead and hide the 12 here. And as you can see for this whole big time, very big resistance on this 50-period EMA. So still have this as a potential support point to the downside. So on the current month, that EMA would be 1063. Don't necessarily think we're going to be coming in that low, although if we do draw a line on that level or just around it, we are going to be looking at, if we do look all the way left, periods of support and resistance on this big move back from the summer of 2020, 4 years ago, to the start of 2021. So definitely an opportunity there if we do see prices slipping down, and I wouldn't expect anything to get much lower than that. But right now, if we go ahead and look at the current setup and formation, we're looking at very nice support coming in on top of the 26-period EMA here for this monthly chart for Chainlink. And the other thing that's significant right now too is that we're looking at the third month for month over month of inside bar trading. So essentially, if we look at April, we had a pretty big price range. And then if we look at May, actually saw prices stay within that range. And then on the current month, although we're only halfway, are seeing prices trade within that as well. So this is a consolidation candlestick pattern setup. So typically we are going to expect that whatever direction we do see it break first, whether that be a new lower low out of this range or a new higher high out of this range, is going to be the direction of breakout that we're likely going to expect the trend to continue in. And yeah, so like we said, as long as we do keep holding support and maintaining these sort of inside bar patterns, we are still expecting on the monthly anyway, especially with holding these support levels, that we will see a continuation and a follow through in the bullish direction just based on the initial trend here. So despite having on the last month one of the lowest volumes that we have seen, like we said, since the fall actually did see an increase in volume, but that has tapered off, also did taper off for the bearish side as well. So for example, the current month, we're only looking at about 13.614 million, being halfway. So it's about 16 days left before this monthly candle closes. And yeah, so still plenty of time to see volume come in, but not necessarily likely. And if we do basically double that, we're looking at about 26, 27 million compared to what we saw last month. For example, we were looking at 49.7 million. So a lot of decrease for overall volume, and even the most recent bearish bar after that, 40.1 million as well. So substantially going to be lower volume coming in and likely still maintaining this inside bar pattern month over month here. So like we said, not necessarily a bad thing, just does take a little bit more time for this to play out, since right now we're looking very heavily on the reliance of this overall chart here. So the reason we're also looking at the 26 on the monthly, 26 period EMA, is that looking left back from February, essentially back all the way once we had our first test in July of 2021, you can see we did have support confirmation, flipped it on this bearish candle back in January of 2022, and then did have 3 months here where we did confirm resistance off this 26 period exponential moving average before finding resistance on this 50 period EMA on this monthly. So very reliable indications right now that are holding up, so we're going to continue to use them. So right now we're looking at 26 period EMA being at 12,785. So still kind of within that range of the $13 support that we're hoping holds up. And yeah, it depends where it closes, especially since you can see on the most recent 2 months that have closed, we're looking at a little bit of tiny downside shadows, still bouncing right off of that 12 period EMA. And then looking at that very nice close right around the $13 level as well. Now, if we want to look at some technicals for the monthly, specifically looking at RSI, same sort of thing like we talked about on the shorter term charts. And since we did get our bullish cross on top of this exponential moving average, you can see that right now we have rallied and actually found some support. So hopefully this can still provide a little bit more support as we do see the longer term RSI trend back to the upside. That would be a nice sight to see, especially being in a little bit more of a longer term bullish setup and pattern. And like we said, obviously being the monthly chart does take a lot longer to play out since each candle is a 1 month time frame. But especially after seeing the RSI this far below the exponential moving average and finally getting this bullish cross here on the bottom, and especially breaking this big 50 period EMA support point, as well as the 26 period exponential moving average resistance point, that's going to be an extremely strong level and indication as well, which is why we're hoping to get reliance out of not only these exponential moving averages providing that longer term support, but also for the support for this RSI as well. But so with that said, if we actually do see over the next month or two the RSI slipping now substantially below this exponential moving average, then that's going to be a pretty big indication as well, especially if we do end up losing some of these supports for the exponential moving average on this monthly chart for a Chainlink here. So one of the things too about Chainlink right now is that it's one of the few altcoins and cryptos right now that's in a completely and maintaining a completely bullish setup for these exponential moving averages on the monthly time frame. So we do have the 12 period on top, followed by the 26, and then following up the rear is the 50 period on bottom. So a very nice bullish formation. And then in addition to that, actually starting to see a little bit of a gap on these exponential moving averages as well, which is kind of why it's also important that bulls actually maintain support on this. And then the following months, see a little bit more of that follow through. That would be an extremely good and bullish sign here for the upward direction for Chainlink. And then so zooming out even farther now, this is actually the 2-month chart here. So a lot of long time frame and still about 2 weeks left to close, about 16 days left on this current. But just want to point out specifically the 12 and 26 on this chart, how reliable they are and how significant just based on these prices. So even when we did have the formation of the 12 period, you could see what very nice support it actually was for the crypto price this whole way up until the January of 2022 timeframe when we broke it, confirmed it, and backtested it as resistance, and then finally broke below the 26, and then confirmed 26 as big resistance point for a big long period of time here, just like we did on the 50 period for the monthly, and then finally had a nice bullish break on top of the 26 and the 12, and then have backtested and maintained support. So ideally, we would love to see the next monthly candle or 2-monthly candle starting in July have a little bit more of that follow through upside direction to the upside, especially since we know right now that these exponential moving averages are a very nice guide, and we haven't really had any backtest breaking and invalidating them as relevant and significant levels just yet. So kind of another time frame, and this is why you always need to shift time frames to see what works and what doesn't on different type charts. And so this is why we are going to maintain these time frames and exponential moving averages for the analysis of Chainlink here, because they have been extremely relevant and great guides as we do looking at potential analysis for the price direction. So overall, still not in an awful situation, but like we said, longer term, if we don't actually see maintaining support on top of the $13 level, and especially on top of this $12.91 support point that we have held for closing support on this daily for so long, then that's pretty much going to be a bad sign, especially if we do put in a lower high after that, below pretty much this $19 level. So best case scenario for the bulls right now is pretty much to see the rest of the crypto space do really well as well, because things are still so correlated right now that we need the rest of crypto to still perform and behave as well. But otherwise, we actually do still need to see putting in a higher low on top of the previous low and the support point at $12.91 like we mentioned, and then also seeing the next leg of upside to actually top out this $13 level, and probably realistically at that point put in a test to see if we can actually shoot up and break and hopefully top out this previous trend high, which right now we're looking at being 22,876. But as always, do love hearing everyone's thoughts, issues, questions, predictions, all that stuff down below in the comments sections. Do love getting back to you. Feel free to reach out over on Twitter or X as well. @coin_trades is the handle over there. That is going to do it for now. Do appreciate all the continuous love and support. As always, does mean so much. Hope you enjoyed the show today. If you did, please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe if you have not done so just yet. But otherwise, that is going to do it for now, though. So stay safe, take care, coin traders, and I'll catch you back in the next video.